The thing standing in my lane looked like a coyote at first, until it rose up on its hind legs and called my name in my mother's exact voice, and I was doing 60 miles per hour on Highway 78 with nowhere to swerve and no way to stop in time. I work for U.S. Border Patrol. Most people assume that means I'm stationed along the Mexican border, but last August I was on a training rotation with Imperial County Sheriff's Department, working drug interdiction and coordination drills around the Salton Sea. It's standard interagency cooperation. We share resources, compare techniques, learn each other's protocols. Highway 78 is one of the main east-west routes through the Imperial Valley, connecting the Salton Sea to the Arizona border. I'd driven it dozens of times between El Centro and Brawley, past the endless agricultural fields and the scattered towns that most people only see from the interstate. It's usually quiet in the late afternoon when the farm workers have gone home and the tourists are still deciding where to eat dinner. I just finished a briefing in Brawley and was heading back toward El Centro around 4 p.m. AC running full blast, windows up against the heat, radio tuned to the sheriff's frequency in case anything developed. The temperature outside was pushing 110 degrees, typical for August in the Imperial Valley. Heat shimmers danced over the asphalt like low flames. I topped off my patrol unit at a Chevron station on the outskirts of Brawley. The clerk, an older Hispanic woman, glanced at my uniform and asked if I was heading south. Eventually, I told her, taking 78 back to El Centro. She nodded slowly. You be careful out there this time of day. Sometimes the heat makes people see things, makes them act strange. I figured she meant mirages or maybe heat exhaustion. I dealt with both plenty of times working in the desert. I thanked her, got back in the patrol unit, and headed west on Highway 78. The first 15 miles were routine. Flat agricultural land stretched in every direction, broken by irrigation canals and the occasional farmhouse set back from the road. A few cars passed going the other direction. Farm trucks mostly, and one RV with Arizona plates probably heading for the Salton Sea. That's where I saw the coyote. It stood dead center in my lane, maybe 60 yards ahead, motionless in the blazing sun. No shade for miles in either direction, no cover, no logical reason for any animal to be standing on hot asphalt. I eased off the gas and tapped the horn twice. Most wildlife will bolt when they hear a vehicle coming. This one didn't. I slowed to 30 miles per hour, then 20, waiting for it to move. At 40 yards, I could see the details that should have warned me. The ribcage was too long, stretched like someone had pulled it from both ends. The hips sat wrong, rotated slightly forward. The forelegs were positioned too far apart, like the creature was trying to balance something it didn't understand. At 20 yards, it stood up, not the way a bear rears to scent the wind. This was different. It straightened like a person, knees tracking inward, arms hanging with elbows flared wider than any human shoulder joint allows. The muzzle stayed elongated, but the eyes did something I'd never seen in an animal. They locked onto mine and tracked my movement side to side with small corrections, not head turns. I stopped the patrol unit 15 feet away. The engine idled. The AC fan cycled. The radio crackled with distant chatter from deputies working traffic stops near Calexico. Then it said my name. Robert. Not a sound that reminded me of my name. My actual name. Pronounced exactly the way my mother says it when she wants my attention. Same stress on the first syllable. Same slight uptick at the end that turns it into a question. Hearing that come out of a coyote's throat on Highway 78 in broad daylight sent ice down my spine despite the 100-degree heat. I reached for my radio to call it in, but stopped. Call in what? Animal acting strange? Possible heat-related hallucination? I was a federal agent on an interagency assignment. I couldn't afford to sound unstable. The thing took a step toward my vehicle. Its gait was wrong from the first movement. Too many joints trying to find a rhythm, like someone learning to walk in a body they'd never used before. The front, paws, hands, whatever they were, scraped against the asphalt with a sound like fingernails on concrete. I made a decision. Fight or flight. I chose flight, with prejudice. I threw the transmission into drive and floored it, aiming to split the lane and go around. The patrol unit surged forward, and at the last second the thing tried to move aside but couldn't decide which direction to go. Its limbs tangled, and I felt the front bumper connect with a soft, rubbery impact. No crack of bone, no satisfying thud that you get when you hit a deer or coyote. Just a wet, yielding collision that absorbed the impact wrong. I didn't stop to check for damage. I kept the accelerator down, building speed through 40, 50, 60 miles per hour. In the rearview mirror, I saw something that made me grip the steering wheel hard enough to hurt. The thing was upright again, standing in the road behind me. Not limping, not injured, just watching. Then it started to run. The stride was wrong at first, too many moving parts trying to coordinate. But after a few seconds it began to smooth out, finding a rhythm that ate up ground at an impossible pace. It was gaining on me. I was doing 70 miles per hour on a straight stretch of highway, and something that had been standing on 4 legs 5 seconds ago was keeping pace on foot. I keyed my radio. Imperial County. This is Border Patrol 772. I need immediate backup on Highway 78 westbound. Mile marker. I glanced at the odometer. Mile marker 43. In pursuit of unknown subject displaying erratic behavior. Copy. 772. Can you describe the subject? I looked in the mirror again. The thing was still there, maybe 50 yards back, running with a stride that was becoming more human with each step. But the proportions were wrong. Too tall, too narrow through the torso, arms too long. Negative on description, I radioed back. Just send units to intercept westbound 78. The highway ahead was empty. No traffic, no cover, just heat shimmer and endless farmland. I kept the speed at 75, which was fast enough to be dangerous on the rural 2-lane, but not fast enough to lose control. Behind me, the pursuing figure was learning to run like a human. The initial awkwardness was disappearing, replaced by a smooth, powerful stride that covered ground like a marathon runner, but no human could maintain that pace at highway speeds. Mile marker 40, 39, 38. Still no other traffic. Still no backup visible on the horizon. The radio crackled with dispatchers trying to coordinate units, but the closest deputy was 20 minutes out. That's when I heard it. A sound like footsteps on asphalt, audible over the engine noise and road noise. Rhythmic slapping that matched my speed. When I slowed for a curve, the sound drew closer. When I accelerated on the straightaways, it fell back slightly. At mile marker 35, I spotted flashing lights ahead. 2 Imperial County units had set up a rolling roadblock, their vehicles positioned to narrow the lanes but allow me to pass through. I radioed my approach and slowed to 50 miles per hour. As I passed between the patrol cars, I saw the deputies' faces. Professional calm mixed with something else. Wariness, maybe. Or the kind of alertness you get when you're dealing with something outside normal parameters. In my mirror, I watched the pursuit end. The figure stopped running and stood motionless at the edge of the roadblock perimeter. From a distance, it looked almost human. Tall, thin, with long, dark hair. But it didn't approach the deputies. Didn't try to continue the chase. It just stood there, watching. One of the deputies, Sergeant Williams, walked over to my vehicle as I pulled onto the shoulder. "Agent Torres," he said. "What exactly were we chasing?" I looked back toward the roadblock. The figure was still visible in the distance, but something was different. It was smaller now, lower to the ground. By the time I focused my eyes, it was back to its original coyote shape, standing on 4 legs at the edge of the heat shimmer. I honestly don't know, I told Williams. Started as a coyote blocking the road. When I hit it with the vehicle, it got up and started chasing me. On foot, at highway speed. Williams looked at me carefully, the way cops do when they're trying to decide if someone is lying, confused, or having a mental health crisis. "Agent," he said finally, "we've had reports like this before, usually in summer, usually on the empty stretches of highway. Things that look like animals until they don't, things that know names they shouldn't know." "What kind of reports?" "Coyotes that stand upright, dogs that speak in human voices, missing persons who turn up weeks later with no memory of where they've been." He glanced back toward the roadblock. "The old-timers around here call them skinwalkers, Navajo term. But we're not on the reservation, and we don't have many Navajo in Imperial County. So what are they?" Williams shrugged. "Above my pay grade. But I'll tell you what we do when we get calls like this. We set up a perimeter, keep people moving, don't let anyone stop alone on the empty highways. Usually whatever it is moves on after a day or 2. I stayed at the roadblock for another hour, filling out paperwork and watching the distant figure. It never approached, never tried to continue westward. As the sun started to set and the temperature dropped below 90 degrees, it simply disappeared. Not running away, not hiding behind cover. One moment it was there, the next, it wasn't. The deputies maintained the roadblock until dark, then established a patrol pattern for the next 3 days. No more incidents were reported. Traffic flowed normally. The highway went back to being just a highway, but the front bumper of my patrol unit had a smear of coarse hair embedded in the plastic. Pale, almost white, like the undercoat of a coyote. The maintenance crew at the motor pool tried to clean it off, but the fibers were worked deep into the material. They finally had to replace the entire bumper assembly. I finished my rotation with Imperial County 2 weeks later and went back to my regular assignment. But I never forgot the lesson from Highway 78. Some things out here are older than our jurisdictions, older than our understanding. The smart response is to establish perimeter control, keep people moving, and don't engage with things that wear faces they shouldn't have. 6 months later, I was working a case near Calexico when I got a call from Sergeant Williams. He said they'd had another incident on Highway 78. A family from Phoenix reported being followed by something that looked like their missing uncle. The uncle had died in a car accident 3 years earlier. Same protocols, Williams told me. Roadblock, perimeter control, keep traffic moving. Whatever these things are, they don't like organized response. They prefer lone targets. I asked him if he'd ever figured out what we were dealing with. Honestly, Williams said, I don't want to know. I just want to make sure people get home safe. Sometimes that means accepting there are things in the desert we're not equipped to understand. If you ever drive the empty highways around the Salton Sea, remember this. Don't stop for animals that behave strangely. Don't investigate sounds that carry your name on the desert wind. And if something starts chasing your vehicle at highway speeds, don't slow down to get a better look. Call for backup, keep moving, and let the professionals establish a perimeter. The desert has been patient for a very long time, and some of the things living in it have learned to be patient too. They're always watching the highways, always learning from the travelers who pass through. The smart thing is to pass through quickly and not give them time to practice being you. The thing standing by the dead fish shore looked exactly like my 12-year-old daughter Emma, down to the Hello Kitty pajamas and the way she twisted her hair when she was nervous. Except Emma was asleep in our 10-20 feet behind me, and this version's eyes blinked from the bottom up like a lizard. I don't scare easy. I'm a contractor from Riverside, the kind of guy who double-checks equipment and argues about proper load distribution. Last November, I took my family, my wife Linda, our 12-year-old daughter Emma, and our 8-year-old son Tyler, to Salton Sea State Recreation Area for a long weekend. It's about an hour southeast of Palm Springs, down Highway 78 through the Badlands. We'd never been there before, but the photos online showed decent camping near the water, and Linda wanted the kids to see something different from our usual trips to the mountains. The Salton Sea is unique. It's California's largest lake, created by accident in 1905 when the Colorado River breached its banks and flooded the Salton Sink. The water is saltier than the Pacific Ocean, and it's been shrinking for decades, leaving behind miles of exposed lake bed covered with fish bones and crystallized salt. The smell hits you first. Hydrogen sulfide mixed with rotting algae. It's not pleasant, but you adjust to it. When we checked in at the ranger station, the guy behind the counter looked tired. He handed me a campsite map and said we'd be on the North Loop, close to the water but not right on the shoreline. Any particular reason for that? I asked. Smells better with some distance, he said. And it's quieter up there. Sometimes the lakeshore gets active at night. Fish die-offs, birds feeding, lots of noise. We drove the loop road past a few RVs and found our site tucked behind some tamarisk trees. You could see the water through the branches, a strange, steel-gray expanse that stretched to the chocolate mountains on the eastern horizon. The kids immediately wanted to explore, but Linda took one look at the fish bones scattered along the shore and decided they'd stay close to camp. Emma collected smooth pieces of driftwood, while Tyler skipped rocks that sank instead of bouncing. The water was too dense with salt and algae. The late afternoon sun was warm, maybe 75 degrees, and except for the smell, it felt like any family camping trip. We set up the tent, inflated air mattresses, and got a fire going in the metal ring. Around 6 p.m. we drove to Neyland for dinner and supplies. The town is small, a few hundred people, mostly retirees and folks who can't afford to live closer to San Diego. We ate at a combination gas station and diner where the cashier asked how long we were staying. 3 nights, I told her. She nodded slowly. You folks staying right on the water? Close to it. North Loop at the state park. Well, she said, handing me the receipt. Just keep your kids close after dark. The lake plays tricks sometimes. Sounds carry funny, and people see things that aren't there. Probably just the salt crystals in the air messing with light. But she trailed off like she'd said more than she meant to. We got back to camp around 8, just as the sun was setting behind the Santa Rosa Mountains. The temperature dropped fast in the desert way, and we fed the fire with driftwood Emma had collected. The kids roasted marshmallows while Linda and I shared a beer and watched the first stars appear. By 10:30, everyone was in the tent. I zipped the rain fly even though there wasn't a cloud in the sky. Desert nights get cold, and the wind off the lake carried grit that got into everything. I set my phone alarm for 7 a.m. and fell asleep to the sound of small waves lapping at the shore. I woke up the first time around 1:15 a.m. My phone showed the time clearly. The tent was warm and still, everyone breathing quietly in their sleeping bags. Outside, I could hear the lake, but the sound was wrong. Instead of gentle waves, it was more like splashing, rhythmic, like someone walking through shallow water. I lay there listening, telling myself it was probably birds. Pelicans feed at night sometimes, and there were always plenty of fish carcasses to attract scavengers. But the splashing had a pattern that didn't match any animal I knew. Step, step, pause, step, step, pause. I sat up and unzipped the sleeping bag. Linda's hand found my arm in the dark. What is it? She whispered. Probably nothing. Going to check. I grabbed the LED flashlight from my boots and eased the tent zipper open. The night air was cold and sharp, maybe 40 degrees, with that metallic smell the lake gets after sunset. I stepped outside in my socks and underwear, listening. The splashing had stopped. I clicked on the flashlight and swept the beam toward the water. The shore was maybe 30 yards away, visible through the tamarisk trees. In the LED glare, I could see the usual debris: fish bones, plastic bottles, clumps of algae like brown seaweed. Nothing moving. I was about to go back inside when I saw her. Emma was standing at the water's edge, maybe 25 feet from the tent. She had her back to me, wearing her pink Hello Kitty pajamas and bare feet. Her long brown hair hung straight down her back, and she was perfectly still, like she was watching something in the water. My first thought was sleepwalking. Emma had done it a few times when she was younger, usually when she was stressed or sleeping somewhere new. I started toward her, keeping the flashlight beam low so I wouldn't startle her awake. "Emma," I called softly. "Honey, come back to the tent." She didn't respond, didn't even shift her weight. I got closer and noticed something that made my stomach clench. Behind me, through the tent wall, I could see 3 shapes in sleeping bags: Linda, Tyler, and Emma. All accounted for. I stopped walking and raised the flashlight higher. The beam hit the figure by the water, and she turned toward me slowly. It was Emma's face. The same round cheeks, the same small nose, the same green eyes. But something was wrong with the proportions. The head was slightly too large for the neck, and the eyes were set just a fraction too far apart. When she blinked, the eyelids moved upward instead of down. Smooth, deliberate, like a reptile. "Daddy," she said in Emma's voice. Perfect pitch, perfect inflection. "Come see what I found." I backed away from the water, keeping the light on her. She took a step toward me, and her gait was wrong. Too stiff, like her joints weren't bending properly. Her bare feet made soft, squishing sounds on the salt-crusted mud. "Emma's in the tent," I said, not sure why I was talking to it. "I am Emma," it replied, tilting its head at an angle that made my spine crawl. "Look what the water brought me, Daddy." It raised one hand, and I saw what it was holding. Fish bones, dozens of them, arranged in a careful pattern like a small sculpture. The bones were fresh, still pink with meat, still dripping. I turned and ran for the tent. "Linda!" I shook her awake, probably harder than I should have. "Get the kids up. We need to leave. Now." "What's wrong?" She was instantly alert, the way parents get when something threatens their children. There's someone out there. Someone pretending to be Emma. Through the tent wall, I could hear slow footsteps circling us. Squish, squish, pause. Squish, squish, pause. The footsteps of someone walking in wet sand, except we were on dry ground. Linda sat up and looked at our sleeping kids. Emma was curled on her side, thumb in her mouth like she used to do when she was little. Tyler was sprawled across his sleeping bag, one arm flung over his eyes, both breathing deeply, clearly asleep. "Mike," Linda whispered. "What exactly did you see?" Before I could answer, something tapped on the outside of the tent. 3 soft knocks, right at head level. "Daddy?" Emma's voice, muffled by the nylon. "Why won't you come see? I found something special." The real Emma stirred in her sleeping bag but didn't wake up. Linda's eyes went wide. I grabbed my jeans and boots, pulling them on as quietly as I could. The tapping came again, more insistent this time. "Daddy, please." The fish told me secrets. That wasn't something Emma would say. My daughter was afraid of dead fish. She wouldn't even walk on the beach at Huntington when there were kelp flies. I motioned for Linda to get the kids ready while I unzipped the tent flap just enough to peer out. The thing that looked like Emma was standing right outside, close enough that I could see the details that were wrong. Her skin had a waxy sheen in the flashlight beam, and her hair moved even though there was no wind. When she smiled, her teeth were too white, too perfect, like porcelain. "We're leaving," I whispered to Linda. "Pack fast. Don't wake them up abruptly." Linda nodded and started stuffing sleeping bags into their sacks. I grabbed the car keys and my wallet, keeping one eye on the tent flap. The fake Emma had moved. I could hear her footsteps circling the tent again, but slower now, more deliberate. "I know you're listening," she said, her voice taking on a sing-song quality that made my skin crawl. "I know you want to see what the water gave me. Come out, Daddy. Come see." Tyler stirred and opened his eyes. Before he could speak, I put a finger to my lips and motioned for him to stay quiet. He looked confused but nodded. Linda gently shook Emma awake, holding her hand over her mouth until she was fully conscious. "We're playing a quiet game," Linda whispered to both kids. "We need to pack up and get to the car without making any noise." "Can you do that?" Emma nodded, still groggy. Tyler was more alert, his eyes darting toward the tent walls where we could all hear the slow footsteps continuing their circle. It took us maybe 3 minutes to stuff everything into bags. Not folded, not organized, just crammed in so we could move. I shouldered the heaviest pack and grabbed the cooler handle. "When I open this tent," I whispered, "we walk straight to the car. Don't look around, don't stop, don't talk, just walk." I unzipped the tent flap and stepped out first. The fake Emma was standing about 10 feet away, holding that sculpture of fish bones. In the LED beam, I could see more details that weren't right. Her fingers were too long, with an extra joint in each one. Her neck was stretched slightly, like someone had pulled her head away from her shoulders. "There you are," she said brightly. "Look what I made." I ignored her and motioned for my family to follow. Linda came out next, then the kids. Tyler stayed close to his mother, but Emma, the real Emma, stopped and stared at her doppelganger. "Who is that?" she whispered. "Don't look at it," I said, taking her hand. "Just walk." We moved toward the car in a tight group. Behind us, I could hear the fake Emma following, her bare feet squelching in mud that shouldn't exist on the dry ground. "Why are you leaving?" she called. "I wanted to show you the bones. The fish bones spell words. They spell your name, Daddy. They spell all your names." I fumbled with the car keys, my hands shaking. The SUV chirped as it unlocked, and I threw our gear into the back without ceremony. Linda helped the kids into their seats while I tossed the tent and sleeping bags on top of everything else. The fake Emma was closer now, maybe 5 feet from the car. In the dome light, I could see that her Hello Kitty pajamas were soaking wet, dripping lake water onto the ground. But it wasn't just water. It was thick, dark, and it moved wrong, flowing upward instead of down. "Please don't go," she said, and for a moment her voice cracked with what sounded like genuine sadness. "I've been waiting so long for someone to see my presence." I slammed the hatch and ran for the driver's seat. As I started the engine, she pressed her face against Tyler's window. Up close, the wrongness was even more pronounced. Her nose was slightly flattened, like it had been molded from clay. Her eyes were too bright, reflecting the dashboard lights like mirrors. Tyler whimpered and pressed against Linda. "Drive," Linda said urgently. "Just drive." I threw the car in reverse and backed away from the campsite. The fake Emma stepped away from the car but didn't stop watching us. As we turned toward the camp road, she raised one hand in a perfect imitation of Emma's wave, except her wrist rotated a full circle, the hand spinning like a pinwheel. We drove straight to the ranger station, but it was closed and dark. I didn't stop. We took Highway 78 west toward Brawley, putting distance between us and the lake. In the back seat, Tyler was crying quietly. Emma sat very still, staring out the window. "Mom," Emma said finally. Why did that thing look like me? Linda reached back and squeezed her hand. I don't know, honey, but it wasn't you. We know it wasn't you. We drove to a 24-hour truck stop in Brawley and sat in the fluorescent-lit parking lot until sunrise. I called the Salton Sea Ranger station when they opened and reported what we'd seen. Someone impersonating our daughter. Possible mental health crisis. Recommend wellness check. The ranger I spoke to listened carefully, then said, "This isn't the first call like this we've gotten. Usually happens in the off-season when there aren't many campers. We'll send someone to check the area, but, well, sometimes people see things out there that are hard to explain." What kind of things? Folks who look like family members but aren't. Kids who shouldn't be able to get to the lake alone. People find campsites with fresh food but no cars. No way anyone could have gotten there. He paused. The lake's not natural. Never has been. Sometimes I think it remembers things that fell into it over the years. We never went back to get our campsite fee refunded. I didn't want to drive past that shoreline again. Didn't want to see if anything was still standing by the water's edge. 3 weeks later, Emma started having nightmares. She'd wake up saying she could hear someone calling her name from outside her bedroom window. We live in a second-story apartment. There's nothing outside her window but a 30-foot drop to the parking lot. The dreams stopped after we moved her to the other side of the apartment, away from the window that faced southeast, toward the Salton Sea. I still take my family camping, but never at lakes, and never anywhere the water doesn't flow. The desert has places that remember things differently than we do, and some memories aren't meant for the living. If you ever camp near the Salton Sea, stay away from the shoreline after dark. Don't investigate sounds that carry too clearly across the water, and if you see someone who looks like your family calling to you from the dead fish shore, don't answer back. Some things learn to wear familiar faces, and they're always looking for someone new to add to their collection. The lake is patient. It's been there for over a century, collecting what falls into it. Sometimes what falls in decides to climb back out, wearing faces it has no right to wear. She was standing in our headlight beams for the 4th time, blocking the dirt road 30 miles from anywhere, and this time when she waved at us, I could see that her arm bent in places where there shouldn't be joints. I grew up in Victorville, California, where most summer nights end with someone suggesting a drive to nowhere. My buddy Kyle and I have been those guys since high school. 2 friends in an old Ford Ranger, a cooler in the back, and some plan to shave 20 minutes off a trip by cutting through a section of map that looks empty. We weren't reckless, just casual about risk in the way you get when nothing bad has happened yet. By last July, we'd logged thousands of miles through the high Mojave Desert. We knew where the paved roads ended, which gas stations stayed open late, and which county lines went dead quiet after sundown. We also knew the desert around Barstow can turn from scenic to hostile the minute the sun drops and the temperature plummets 40 degrees. That afternoon, we were coming back from Las Vegas. We'd driven up to visit Kyle's cousin and stayed longer than planned. Typical Vegas story involving free drinks and optimistic slot machine strategies. The route home was Interstate 15 to Barstow, then Highway 18 back to Victorville, but traffic was backed up from a multi-vehicle accident somewhere near Baker. Kyle pulled up his phone GPS and said we could cut southwest on back roads near Daggett, then reconnect with civilization closer to Barstow. He made it sound like we'd done it 100 times. In reality, we'd never taken that particular route. "Save us an hour easy," he said, pointing at the screen. Straight shot across the desert. I checked the time on the dashboard. Already 8:30 p.m., and we'd be chasing the last of the twilight. But sitting in stopped traffic on I-15 wasn't appealing either. We topped off at a truck stop just south of Baker. The wind had died completely, and heat still radiated off the concrete even though the sun was touching the western mountains. Inside, the coolers hummed with energy drinks and bottled water. We grabbed supplies and jerky. The clerk was a weathered guy in his 60s, probably a long-haul trucker who'd taken a stationary job. When Kyle asked about the dirt roads heading southwest toward Barstow, the man looked up from counting register tape. "You boys planning to drive those roads after dark?" "Just cutting through," Kyle said. "Avoiding the backup on 15. The clerk studied us for a moment, then shook his head. "Take the backup. Those desert roads, they're not maintained. They're not marked. And they're not safe after sunset. Especially not in summer." Kyle thanked him like he'd said, "Watch for deer," and paid for our stuff. As we walked back to the truck, I noticed the clerk watching us through the window. We told ourselves he meant flash floods or drunk drivers, or maybe rough terrain that could tear up the suspension. We told ourselves a lot of things that made sense in daylight. The first few miles off the highway were actually paved, cracked and patched asphalt that probably dated to the 1960s. A few scattered houses sat far apart, each with multiple vehicles and the kind of elaborate security fencing you see in areas where law enforcement response times are measured in hours rather than minutes. 10 minutes in, the pavement ended and we hit graded dirt. The road was wider than expected and reasonably smooth, with shallow washboard sections that rattled the cup holders but didn't slow us down much. To our left, the Calico Mountains rose like broken teeth against the darkening sky. To our right, flat desert stretched toward invisible hills. We kept the windows cracked to let heat escape. The air smelled like creosote and dust and the faint ozone scent that comes before desert thunderstorms. Kyle had the radio scanning, but we were too far from any transmitters to pick up anything except static. The road split at an unmarked junction with no signs or mile markers. Kyle chose the left fork, keeping us generally southwest toward where Barstow should be. The speedometer held steady around 45 miles per hour. Fast enough to make decent time, slow enough to react if something wandered into our headlights. Somewhere out there, no landmarks except distant mountains we couldn't identify. The sun dropped behind the western ridgeline and we lost all natural light. High beams cut a cone through the gathering darkness, illuminating pale dirt and scattered Joshua trees. The desert temperature dropped like someone had opened a freezer door. At 9:47 p.m. by the dashboard clock, we saw her for the first time. A woman standing in our lane maybe 50 yards ahead, clearly visible in the headlight beams. She looked young, maybe early 20s, with shoulder-length dark hair and wearing what appeared to be a light-colored dress or long shirt. Her right arm was raised in a slow wave, not frantic, not urgent, just a steady back-and-forth motion. Kyle slowed the truck to a crawl. "What the hell?" There was no vehicle anywhere. No car, no motorcycle, no ATV tracks in the dirt, no buildings, no fence lines, no infrastructure of any kind. Just her, standing alone in the middle of a desert road 30 miles from the nearest town. "Could be broken down," I said. Though even as I said it, I knew it didn't make sense. Maybe her ride left her. We rolled forward slowly. At 20 feet, I could see she was barefoot in her dress, if that's what it was. Seemed too clean for someone who'd been walking in the desert. No dust, no sweat stains, no obvious distress. "Miss?" Kyle called through his open window. "You need help?" She didn't answer, just kept that slow, steady wave. Her head was tilted slightly downward, so we couldn't see her face clearly. But something about her posture struck me as wrong. Too straight, too rigid, like she was holding a position that wasn't natural. Kyle started to pull over, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't stop," I said. "Something's not right. She's obviously in trouble. Look at her feet," I interrupted. "Look at the ground around her." Kyle looked. The dirt road showed tire tracks from previous vehicles and the marks from our own approach. But around the woman, the ground was perfectly smooth. No footprints, no scuff marks, no sign that anyone had walked to that spot. We sat there idling for maybe 30 seconds, both of us trying to make sense of what we were seeing. The woman never looked up, never called out, never showed any sign of acknowledging our presence beyond that steady, mechanical wave. "We should go around," I said finally. Kyle nodded and eased the truck to the left, giving her plenty of space. As we passed, I watched her in the passenger mirror. She didn't turn to follow our movement, didn't change her waving pattern, didn't react at all. She just stood there like a mannequin someone had posed in the road. We drove in silence for the next few miles. The road curved through a section of low hills, then straightened into another long desert valley. I kept checking the mirrors, but saw only darkness behind us. "That was weird," Kyle said eventually. "Yeah, really weird. We should have turned around right then. Should have taken the long way back to I-15 and sat in traffic like civilized people. Instead, we kept going southwest, following what we hoped was still a route toward Barstow. The second time we saw her, she was closer to the truck when we spotted her, maybe 30 feet ahead. Same dress, same wave, same impossible stillness of the ground around her feet. This time, Kyle didn't slow down as much, just steered around her and kept driving. In the mirror, I watched her recede into darkness. Just before she disappeared from view, I could have sworn I saw her turn to watch us go. But that might have been my imagination. "How is she getting ahead of us?" Kyle asked. I'd been wondering the same thing. The road we were following had no forks, no side tracks that we'd seen. We'd been driving steadily for 20 minutes since the first encounter. For her to appear in front of us again, she would have had to cover rough desert terrain in the dark, on foot, fast enough to outpace a vehicle doing 45 miles per hour. "Maybe it's not the same person," I said, though I didn't believe it. The third time, she was standing directly in the center of the road with both arms raised, no longer waving, just holding them up like someone surrendering or maybe trying to stop traffic. Kyle had to brake hard to avoid hitting her. We stopped maybe 10 feet away, engine idling, headlights illuminating her fully. That's when I saw the details that made my stomach clench with fear. Her dress wasn't a dress at all. It was strips of pale fabric wrapped around her body like bandages or burial shrouds. Her hair wasn't dark. It was matted with something that looked black in the headlight glare, and her arms, raised above her head, were too long. The proportions were wrong, like someone had stretched them on a rack. "Kyle," I said quietly, "back up. Right now, she needs help. Look at her arms. Look at how long they are. That's not human." Kyle looked, and I saw his face change as the wrongness registered. The woman, thing, whatever she was, had arms that reached well above her head even with her elbows straight. Her fingers extended into shadows beyond the headlight beam. She took a step toward the truck, and her gait was all wrong. Instead of a heel-to-toe walking motion, she seemed to flow forward like she was sliding on ice. Her feet never fully touched the ground. Kyle threw the truck in reverse and backed away fast, gravel spraying from the tires. The thing, she, whatever, didn't pursue, just stood there with those impossibly long arms raised, watching us retreat into the darkness. What the hell was that? Kyle's voice was tight with control barely maintained. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here. Now." Kyle turned the truck around in a 3-point turn that probably took years off our lives. We were both expecting something to come charging out of the darkness while we were vulnerable, but nothing happened. The road behind us was empty. We drove back the way we'd come, taking the turns faster than was safe on the loose gravel. I kept watching the mirrors, expecting to see movement or lights or something following us. The desert stayed dark and quiet. 20 minutes later, we reached the paved road and turned toward the highway. Neither of us spoke until we saw the lights of Baker in the distance. "We're not telling anyone about this," Kyle said. Agreed. But here's the thing. We couldn't leave it alone. 3 weeks later, we drove back to that same area in broad daylight, following our GPS breadcrumbs to retrace the exact route. We found the dirt road, the unmarked junction, even the straight stretch where we'd encountered the woman 3 times. In daylight, it looked like any other desert back road. Washboard gravel, scattered Joshua trees, mountains in the distance. We stopped at each spot where we'd seen her and found nothing. No footprints, no evidence anyone had ever stood there. The ground was hard-packed and undisturbed, but at the 3rd location, where she'd stood with her arms raised, Kyle found something that made us both uncomfortable. Scratched into the gravel were marks that looked almost like letters. Not English, not Spanish, not any alphabet I recognized. They were arranged in a rough circle maybe 6 feet across, and they looked fresh despite the wind and weather that should have erased them. We took photos and left immediately. A month later, I was talking to a guy I knew from work whose family had lived in the high desert for generations. When I described our experience, leaving out the stranger details, he nodded like he'd heard similar stories before. There are places out here where things happen that don't make sense, he said. Old-timers call them spirit roads, paths that connect places that shouldn't be connected. Most of them are on reservation land, but a few run through BLM territory near Barstow. What kind of things? People see figures that aren't there. Vehicles that disappear around curves and are never found. Hikers who take wrong turns and end up hundreds of miles from where they started with no memory of how they got there. He looked at me seriously. The smart thing is to stay on marked roads after dark and never stop for anyone you don't recognize. Kyle and I still take drives through the desert, but never on unmarked roads and never after sunset. We stick to highways with regular traffic and gas stations and cell phone coverage. The Mojave is beautiful during the day, but it changes when darkness falls, and some of the things that live in it have been here much longer than we have. If you ever find yourself on desert back roads at night and you see someone standing in your headlights, someone who shouldn't be there, who doesn't belong, don't stop to help. Don't try to go around. Turn around immediately and find another route. The desert remembers everything that's ever happened in it, and sometimes those memories take shape and stand in the road, waiting for someone curious enough to stop and see what they want. We never found out what she wanted, and I'm grateful for that every day. The thing wearing Jake's face stood at the edge of Hidden Valley Trail, head tilted wrong, blinking from the bottom up, and I could hear the real Jake's voice echoing from somewhere deep in the rocks behind it, calling my name in the exact same tone. I took the seasonal maintenance job at Joshua Tree National Park to escape the chaos of Los Angeles and make decent money working outdoors. The pay wasn't spectacular, but it beat sitting in traffic on the 405 every morning, breathing exhaust and watching my life tick away in 15-minute increments. Out here in the Mojave, the work was straightforward. Clearing trails after windstorms, hauling debris, fixing broken signs, maintaining the primitive campsites scattered across 900,000 acres of desert. By late October, I'd learned the rhythm of the high desert. The Santa Ana winds come without warning and can shut down a trail in hours. Massive Joshua trees, some over a century old, topple across paths like broken telephone poles. Flash floods carve new channels through washes, and rock slides block access roads. We were supposed to work in pairs after major weather events, but the staff was stretched thin that week, and Hidden Valley Trail needed inspection before the weekend rush. My supervisor, Parks, handed me a radio and told me to check for washouts and debris, then get back before the afternoon heat peaked. Hidden Valley sits in the heart of the park, surrounded by massive granite formations that create a natural amphitheater. The trail loop is popular with families because it's short and relatively flat, but it's also isolated once you drop down into the valley floor. Cell service dies completely in there. The morning air was crisp, maybe 60 degrees, with that sharp clarity you only get in the desert after a storm. I loaded my pack with water, tools, and the radio, then drove the maintenance road to the trailhead. The parking area was empty except for a few ravens picking through trash someone had left behind. I shouldered my pack and started down the rocky path. The trail descends through a narrow gap between two massive rock formations, then opens into the hidden valley, a circular basin maybe half a mile across, ringed by towering granite monoliths. Joshua trees dot the valley floor like ancient sentinels, their twisted arms reaching skyward. The silence out there is absolute. No traffic, no aircraft, no human noise at all. Just the whisper of wind through the rocks and the occasional cry of a red-tailed hawk circling overhead. I worked methodically, clearing fallen branches from the path, moving rocks that had tumbled from the surrounding cliffs. The storm had been fierce. I found sections where flash floods had carved new channels across the trail, leaving deep gullies filled with sand and debris. About an hour in, I reached the far end of the loop where the trail curves back toward the parking area. That's when I saw Jake. He was crouched near a large boulder about 50 yards ahead, his back to me, wearing his usual work clothes, faded Carhartt jacket, well-worn jeans, steel-toed boots. His dark hair caught the morning sunlight. I called out to him, my voice echoing off the surrounding rocks. "Jake, what are you doing out here?" No response. He stayed hunched over, motionless, like he was examining something on the ground. I walked closer, boots crunching on gravel. Jake Martinez was my work partner most days. A good guy, maybe 30 years old, originally from Riverside. We'd been clearing storm damage together all week, but Parks had specifically told me Jake was working the Chala Cactus Garden Trail that morning, miles away on the other side of the park. "Jake," I called again, louder this time. He stood up slowly, too slowly. His arm swung forward first, like someone trying to find their balance before his legs straightened to catch up. The movement looked wrong, mechanical, like watching a marionette being operated by someone who'd never seen a human move before. He turned toward me, and my stomach dropped. It was Jake's face. The same dark eyes, the same narrow nose, the same small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident. But something was off. The proportions were slightly wrong, like a photograph that had been stretched just enough to notice. His skin had a waxy quality, and his eyes didn't track together properly, one focusing on me while the other seemed to look through me. "Austin," he said in Jake's voice. Exactly Jake's voice, down to the slight rasp he got when he'd been working in dusty conditions. "Austin, come here." I stopped walking. Every instinct I had was screaming that this wasn't right. Jake never used my full name. He always called me Oss or just nodded when he wanted my attention. And there was something else. The way he was standing. Jake had injured his left knee in high school football, and he always favored it slightly when he stood still. This thing, this Jake, was putting equal weight on both legs. "Where's your truck?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Austin," he repeated, ignoring my question. "Come closer." I looked around the valley, scanning for any sign of how he could have gotten here. The maintenance road I'd taken was the only vehicle access to Hidden Valley, and I hadn't seen any other trucks. The hiking trails were too rough for vehicles, and besides, I would have heard an engine echoing off these rock walls. The nut Jake took a step toward me. His gait was wrong, too rigid, like his joints weren't bending properly. When he lifted his right foot, it hung in the air for just a moment too long before coming down. His head tilted at an angle that made my spine crawl, too far to the left, as if his neck had more vertebrae than it should. That's when I heard it. "Austin, "Austin, where are you?" Jake's voice, calling from somewhere deeper in the valley. The same voice, the same inflection, but coming from behind a cluster of massive boulders, maybe 100 yards away. I spun toward the sound, then back to the thing standing in front of me. It was smiling now. Jake's smile, but stretched too wide, showing too many teeth. My radio crackled with static. I fumbled for it, never taking my eyes off the not Jake. "Austin, is that you out there?" The real Jake's voice came through the speaker, clear and worried. "I finished at Chawla early and came to help. Where are you, man?" The thing in front of me opened its mouth. When it spoke, Jake's voice came out, but Jake's lips weren't moving in sync with the words. "Don't answer," it said. "Stay here with me, Austin." I keyed the radio with shaking hands. "Jake, where are you exactly?" "I'm at the boulder pile on the north side." His voice crackled back. "I found your trail markers, but I don't see you. You okay?" "The north side." That was behind me, past the rock formation where I'd first heard his voice, which meant the real Jake was somewhere back there. And this thing, this imposter, was standing right in front of me. "Jake," I said into the radio, backing away slowly. "Stay where you are. Don't come toward the main trail. Something's wrong out here." The not Jake's smile faltered. Its head snapped to attention like a dog hearing a whistle. Then it started walking toward me, and the wrongness of its movement became even more pronounced. Its arms swung independently of its stride, and its head bobbed with each step like it was loosely attached. I turned and ran. The trail back to the parking area was a quarter-mile of rocky terrain, but I knew every inch of it from weeks of maintenance work. I jumped over fallen logs, dodged around boulders, my boots slipping on loose gravel. Behind me, I could hear pursuit, not running footsteps, but a strange scraping sound, like something being dragged across stone. My radio crackled again. "Austin, what's happening? I heard you running. Talk to me." I didn't answer. I needed all my breath for the climb out of the valley. The trail wound upward through a narrow passage between two rock faces, then emerged onto the plateau where the parking area sat. I could see my maintenance truck in the distance, maybe 200 yards away. The scraping sound behind me was getting closer. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The not Jake was following, but its method of locomotion had changed completely. It was moving on all fours now, its back arched impossibly high, its head twisted around to keep me in sight. Its hands, Jake's hands, were leaving dark smears on the rocks as it climbed. I reached the parking area and sprinted for my truck. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, dropping them once before managing to unlock the door. I threw myself inside and slammed the locks just as something heavy hit the passenger side window. The not Jake was there, standing upright again, its face pressed against the glass. Up close, I could see that Jake's features were like a mask laid over something else, something with different bone structure underneath. The eyes were the worst part. They moved independently, one tracking left while the other stared straight at me. It raised one hand and pressed it against the window. The fingers were too long, and they bent in too many places. My radio crackled one more time. "Austin, I'm coming up the trail. Whatever's happening, I'm coming to help." I started the truck and threw it in reverse, tires squealing on asphalt. The not Jake stepped back, watching me with that horrible tilted head. As I pulled away, it raised its hand in a perfect mimicry of Jake's casual wave, except the wrist rotated a full 360 degrees. I met the real Jake at the trail junction. He was jogging up the path, radio in hand. Genuine concern creased across his features. When he saw my truck approaching, he flagged me down. "What happened out there?" he asked as I rolled down the window. "You sounded terrified." I looked at his face. The right proportions. The correct eye movement. The natural way he held his shoulders. This was Jake. The real Jake. I could tell because everything about him was exactly as it should be. There was something in the valley, I said. Something that looked like you. Jake's expression shifted from concern to something harder to read. He glanced back toward the Hidden Valley Trail, then at me. Austin, he said carefully. My grandfather used to work for the Park Service back in the 80s. He told me stories about things out here. Things that watch people. Learn from them. He said the old Chemehuvi knew not to go into certain places alone, especially the hidden valleys. What kind of things? The kind that take faces that don't belong to them. Jake's voice was quiet. The kind that practice being human until they get it right. We drove back to the maintenance station together, Jake following in his own truck. I filled out an incident report, keeping the details vague. Possible unauthorized person in Hidden Valley area. Investigation recommended. Parks read it, nodded, and filed it away without comment. But he did ask Jake to partner with me for the rest of the week. 3 days later, a family reported seeing someone who looked like a park ranger trying to lure their teenage daughter away from the group at Hidden Valley. The description matched Jake perfectly, down to the scar above his eyebrow. But Jake had been with me at Skull Rock that entire day, installing new trail markers. The family said the fake ranger's eyes moved wrong, and he blinked from the bottom up. I finished my seasonal contract at Joshua Tree 2 weeks later. On my last day, Parks pulled me aside and handed me a different radio, one with emergency frequencies programmed in. If you ever come back to work here, he said, remember that some places in the desert are older than we are. They have their own rules. The smart thing is to respect those rules and work in pairs. I never went back to Hidden Valley alone. But sometimes, on quiet nights in Los Angeles, I'll catch myself listening for that familiar voice calling my name from somewhere it shouldn't be. And I'll remember the thing that wore Jake's face, practicing its human movements in the shadow of ancient rocks, getting a little bit better each time. If you ever visit Joshua Tree National Park, stick to the marked trails and travel with others. The desert has been there for millions of years, and it's learned to be very, very patient. Some things out there are still learning too, and they're always looking for better teachers. Don't give them the chance to practice being you. The thing in the sheep pen stood upright on its hind legs, wool hanging off its shoulders like a torn costume, and when it opened what should have been a sheep's mouth, my name came out in perfect human speech. I grew up working livestock around Palmdale, California, right where the Antelope Valley spreads out toward the Tehachapi Mountains. Out here, you learn early that the high desert changes fast when the winter storms roll through. Clear skies 1 hour, sideways rain and 50-mile-per-hour winds the next, and lightning splitting the sky over Lancaster. In early December, after one of those storms, I was helping my neighbor Carlos with his flock. His regular hand was up in Bakersfield dealing with a family emergency, so it was just the two of us fixing fence and making sure nothing got loose before the next weather system moved in. The pen sat about 20 minutes northeast of Palmdale, past the wind farms and out toward a shallow wash that drained toward Rosamond Dry Lake. I'd been out there plenty of times helping Carlos. The land had been in his family since the 1950s, when his grandfather bought it cheap from a developer who went bankrupt. 500 acres of scrub and Joshua trees, with good grazing if you knew how to manage the water. The ground was still soft from the downpour, and the air had that clean smell you only get after a desert rain, sage and wet earth, and the faint metallic scent of lightning. I was retying wire at the south corner of the main pen when I noticed one of the ewes standing oddly still in the far enclosure. It wasn't grazing, wasn't shifting weight like sheep do, just locked in place with its head down. At first I thought it might be sick, but then I saw how it was positioned. Sheep don't stand at perfect attention. They don't hold their necks at rigid angles. This one looked like it was listening to something the rest of the flock couldn't hear. I called out to Carlos to check the count, and the thing snapped its head toward me with movements too quick and sharp for a sheep. The neck rotated almost 90 degrees, further than any sheep's spine should allow. That's when I noticed the eyes. Sheep have horizontal pupils and a glassy, distant look. These eyes were round, dark, and tracking my movement with focused intelligence. Human eyes in a sheep's skull. Before I could make sense of what I was seeing, it broke into a run. Not the bouncing, awkward gait of a sheep, but an upright sprint on its hind legs. It plowed straight through the woven wire fence, snapping cedar posts like kindling and tearing out the corner brace in a shower of splinters and twisted metal. My first thought was that someone in a costume was trying to scare us, or maybe steal livestock. Some kind of elaborate prank. Carlos and I jumped on the ATVs and gave chase. The ground was a mess from the storm. Mud sucking at the tires, deep ruts carved by runoff. The thing cut across open ground with that jerky, unnatural run, like it couldn't decide whether to stay upright or drop to all fours. It angled for the wash and disappeared down the embankment into the shadows of the willows that grew along the bottom. We stopped at the edge and slid down on foot, but found nothing except wet clay and a tangle of roots. Upstream, a loose rock tumbled and splashed, but no movement followed. Back at the fence, we examined the break more carefully. There was wool caught on the barbed wire, but it wasn't the coarse, dirty wool you'd expect from a sheep that had just busted through a fence. This was clean, almost white, and cut in even lengths like it had been trimmed with scissors. In the mud around the break were two distinct sets of tracks, cloven hoofprints that looked normal, and beside them, human footprints. Bare feet, but with the toes spread wide and deep impressions in the soft ground. Some of the prints showed a strange toe drag, like the person had an old injury or deformity. We told ourselves it had to be someone messing around. Maybe kids from Lancaster driving out here to cause trouble. But when we locked up and headed back to Carlos's house, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The chain on the south gate was wet and slippery, like someone had been handling it with sweaty palms. Problem was, it hadn't rained for hours, and neither of us had touched that gate. The next morning, we were both back at the pens before sunrise. Carlos brought his Uncle Ray, who'd worked livestock his whole life, and knew how to read sign better than most hunters. Ray took one look at the tracks and said we needed to follow them while they were still fresh. The wash was still slick from the storm, but the clay held every print from the night before. We found more wool caught on rabbit brush about 6 feet up, well above where any sheep could have left it. On a flat stretch of dried mud, the trail reappeared. Coyote tracks, sheep hoofprints, and those same human footprints with the splayed toes. But there was something else. The sequence was wrong. The prints didn't follow a logical pattern. Sometimes the coyote tracks appeared first, then the sheep prints overlaid them. Sometimes the human prints were on top of both. It looked like the same creature was changing between 3 different forms as it moved. Ray knelt down beside one clear human print and pointed to details I hadn't noticed. The big toe was separated from the others by an unnatural gap, almost like a thumb. The heel impression was deeper than the toe marks, suggesting something walking with an unusual gait. "This isn't right," Ray said quietly. "Animals don't change tracks like this, and people don't walk barefoot out here, not with all the thorns and rocks." We drove into Palmdale later that morning for supplies. At the feed store, we asked around without giving too many details. An old rancher named Pete mentioned losing lambs north of Lancaster earlier in the fall. 3 ewes found dead with no blood trail, just drag marks that stopped at the edge of a concrete irrigation canal. Another guy said his neighbor's dog had been acting strange, refusing to go outside after dark and whining at the windows all night. When we got back to the ranch, Carlos's grandfather Esteban was waiting for us. Carlos had called him that morning and told him about the fence break and the strange tracks. Esteban listened to our story, then shook his head slowly. "There are things out here that are older than the ranches," he said in his careful, accented English. "My father told me stories, things that watch the livestock, learn from them. They take shapes that aren't theirs to take." Ray asked what we should do. Esteban's answer was simple. Don't trail anything into the washes after rain, and never follow sign that changes from animal to human and back again. That evening, Carlos and I decided to keep watch. We didn't build a fire and kept the lights off except for the ATVs, which we positioned facing the wash with red filters over the headlamps. We counted the flock twice. 38 ewes, 2 rams, all accounted for. The night was quiet except for distant thunder over the Tehachapi Mountains. Around midnight, one of the ewes gave a short, sharp bleat. A few seconds later, the same sound came from the direction of the wash, but something was off about it. The pitch was right, the duration was right, but it lacked the natural vibrato of a real sheep's call. It sounded like a recording played back on cheap speakers. We turned toward the sound and I caught movement along the fence line. A shape rose up beside the main pen, tall and narrow, with what looked like a hand gripping the wire. It moved sideways along the fence, not hopping over like a sheep would, but sliding like it was testing the barrier. I started my ATV and the engine noise sent it dropping to the ground. It loped along the outside of the pen toward the lowest section of fence, moving on all fours but with a rhythm that was all wrong. Too much time in the air between strides, like it was bouncing rather than running. We gave chase across the open ground. My headlight caught it cresting a small rise. Tall, narrow through the shoulders, with something draped over its back that looked like raw hide sewn with patches of white wool. It stumbled, dropped to all fours for several strides, then surged upright again and made for the wash. We hit the soft ground at the bottom and bogged the ATVs. Carlos and I followed on foot until we reached a shelf of exposed bedrock. The tracks just ended. 2 clear right-foot human prints, then a cluster of cloven marks, then nothing on the bare stone. At first light, we found one of the ewes downstream, tangled in loose wire against a debris pile. It was alive, but shaking so violently it could barely stand. There were no bite marks, no injuries at all. The ewe looked like it had been placed there deliberately. By the 3rd day, we'd stopped trying to convince ourselves it was a prank. Carlos called his Uncle Ray back, and I brought my brother Sam. We spent the morning reinforcing the weak spots in the fence and setting up what Ray called perimeter control. Low-trip wires between mesquite bushes, old beer cans hung on fishing line that would rattle if anything brushed past. Ray found something that afternoon that changed everything. In a side cut where the wash undercut a concrete abutment from an old bridge, he discovered a shallow cave hidden behind a curtain of dead tumbleweeds. Inside was a rolled tarp, some old clothes, an army surplus canteen, and a pocket knife with fresh lanolin smeared along the blade. In one corner was a pile of wool sorted into neat bundles by length and color. At the edge of the sandy floor was a partial footprint, heel and arch pressed deep, like someone had crouched there for hours. Beside it was a perfect cloven hoofprint in the same damp layer. We photographed everything and called the Los Angeles County Sheriff's livestock investigator. He told us to preserve the scene and wait for him to arrive the next morning. That night, Esteban came out to help us keep watch. He brought a bag of salt and drew a line in the dirt around the pens, making a complete circle. He told us, without raising his voice, not to let anyone cross that line until sunrise. Then he set 2 snares on the outside of the fence, not tight enough to break a leg, but strong enough to hold something in place. Around 10 p.m., a small storm cell built over Lancaster. By midnight, the wind was gusting hard enough to make the fence posts creak and the animals cluster together for shelter. The tripwires started rattling. The first one, then another, then 3 at once. We swung our lights toward the sound and caught movement just outside the salt line. A figure standing close to the fence, tall and impossibly thin, head tilted down at an angle that looked like a neck injury. It stepped back slowly when the lights hit it, staying just outside the salt. Lightning lit up the whole valley, and in that brief white flash, I saw it clearly. The thing wore patches of wool stitched to human skin, and its face was a horrible mixture. Sheep features grafted onto a human skull, with eyes that reflected the light like mirrors. A second later, one of the snares went taut with a metallic snap. The figure jerked backward, caught by the ankle, and let out a sound that was half bleat, half human scream. Then, it twisted in a way that no spine should allow and pulled free, leaving something dark on the cable. By morning, the livestock investigator found the snare cable kinked into tight spirals, like it had been twisted by hand. The dark stain tested positive for blood, human blood, but there was something else mixed in. Proteins that didn't match anything in the database. We decided that would be our last night of watching. The next morning, Carlos loaded the flock onto trailers and moved them to his cousin's place near Quartz Hill. He sold the Palmdale property 6 months later and never went back. I kept working ranches around the Antelope Valley, but never alone and never near that wash. Carlos's grandfather was right about one thing. There are things out here older than we are, and they're patient enough to watch and learn. The smart thing is to respect what you don't understand and work in pairs. Sometimes I drive past the old place on my way to Lancaster. The pens are gone now, torn down by the new owners. But late at night, when the wind is right, I swear I can still hear that perfect imitation of a sheep's call echoing from the wash, just a little too perfect to be real. If you work livestock in the high desert, remember this. When something acts wrong, trust your instincts. When the sign changes from animal to human and back, don't follow it. And if you ever hear your animals calling from places they shouldn't be, don't answer back. Some things are still learning to be what they're not, and they're always looking for better teachers.